Professor, I am so sorry. How are you this morning?
Oh, no, that is okay. Nice to meet you, though. I'm glad that we finally were able to make contact.
Hafa Adai, right? Am I saying it right?
Yes, half a day. Hola.
Hafa Day.
Half a day.
Buenos días, profesor. Es un honor para mí. I think this is a historical interview because I don't know of anybody else who has coordinated an interview between the archipelago of Puerto Rico and the archipelago of the island of Guam, territories and colonies as it may. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for me. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for the conversations that we've had via stream, via messenger. I want to talk a little bit about who you are first, and then talk about Guam, and then get right into a lot of the stuff that we share as islands and this experience of more than 120 years of colonialism or territories, or how is it defined, uh, Professor?
Oh, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for talking to me, and I look forward to us sharing stories with each other from our islands. Because, yes, we are many time zones apart, but when we look at our political status, when we look at our history, we're very similar, and we should talk to each other more, and we should learn from each other more. And so I think, what you said, colonies, there's a lot of fancy words that people use to refer to our islands in order to lessen the impact of calling them colonies. But I think it's important to just remember that, when the United States took us, they were much more upfront about taking colonies and then building an empire. And just because, they let us have a non-voting delegate, that
Yeah,
doesn't mean that we stop being colonies.
right. I'm going to say something in Spanish real quick. Para los que nos están escuchando, estoy hablando con el profesor Michael Lujan Bevacqua. Did I say that right? Bevacqua?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Bebacue es un doctor de la Universidad de Guam. Estamos hablando sobre nuestras similitudes y muchas cosas que tenemos en común en cuanto a territorios, como en el caso de Puerto Rico, en el caso de Guam, las Islas Vírgenes, Samoa, la lucha que se ha estado dando ahora mismo con compañeros o personas en el estado de Hawái, que hay un conflicto inmenso por las personas nativos aborígenes de allí que se sienten, como sabemos, invadidos. Todo esto ocurrió Filipinas, Puerto Rico, todas las islas que mencioné como Guam, Samoa, y ahora, 120 y pico de años después, hay un despertar de muchos de nuestros ciudadanos precisamente caminando hacia la soberanía, porque queremos tener identidad propia sin tener la imposición o el sistema coloniaje que hemos estado experimentando durante tantos años. Professor, are you teaching right now history at the University of Guam?
Yes, I teach part-time now. My main job is I'm the curator of the Guam Museum. But I
Awesome.
taught at the University of Guam for 10 years. And while I was there, I helped found a program for the study of our people, the Chamoru people,
The
the
Chamorro
indigenous
people,
people
yeah.
from Guam, and then in the Marianas Islands, including our islands to the north. And so, but I am teaching a class right now focusing on sort of retelling our stories, focusing on lecturing in developing a series of lectures that will become chapters for a new Guam history book.
Doctor, could you explain or share with us a little bit about the history before colonialism?
Oh
Uh,
yes, oh yes. And so the people, so the ancestors of the Chamorros of today, we don't know what they called themselves, but we do know
mm,
that they were incredible navigators because they made the first voyage into the open ocean of the Pacific and were successful because they settled more than 1,000 miles from the coast of Asia. They settled the islands that we call home today, Guam, Saipan, the Northern Marianas Islands. And so islands for thousands of years, connecting to other Pacific Island groups in Micronesia, and then developing their own culture, their own sort of society, developing our own sort of architecture. So by the time of contact with Europeans, the Chamoru people had started to build their homes on tall stone megaliths called lati stones. And so some of these lati could only be about 3 feet tall. Some of them, the tallest that we know, could be about 16 feet tall.
Wow.
And so, and so a culture which was matrilineal. So our creation story talks about our people in the world being created by a brother and sister who sacrificed themselves to create the world and sacrificed themselves to give life to the world. And so the culture at the time that the Spanish came our way was matrilineal, meaning the sort of people drew their identity and their families and their clans from their female relations, from their mothers and their mothers' mothers, but also that every family was sort of governed by every clan was governed by a brother and a sister, the oldest brother and the oldest sister. And this was also for the villages, that society was, it mirrored our creation story, in which a brother and a sister sort of created the world. So Chamoru life was dictated by brothers and sisters who would organize their clans, and this would even extend up to the villages, that a brother and sister would also sort of govern the affairs of a village.
Is it how much of the culture still remains of the Chamorro people?
And so many things have changed. Many things, unfortunately, were lost because when the Spanish came in, they saw, for example, the everyday power of women in Chamorro lives. So, for example, one priest wrote down that women even had the right to cheat on their husbands, but a husband was not allowed to cheat on his wife. And that a woman could, if she had caught her husband cheating on her, she could bring her family, other women in the village, and they could beat him up, burn his house down, take all of his things. And so the Spanish attacked everything that they saw that they didn't like or they couldn't control. So they suppressed the power of women. Our people had a religion based on the veneration of ancestral spirits, the spirits of our ancestors, and they kept the bones of our ancestors.
Right.
And so they kept skulls. So a year after one of your relatives had died, you would dig up the skull and keep it in the house. And for your male relatives, if they were warriors, then you would dig up the bones in their legs and you would carve them into spears or into small knives. And so the bones were sacred. And so the Spanish, when they came in, they, of course, tried to destroy the skulls, crushing them, breaking them to try to break the connection that Chamorros had to their ancestors. Even the canoes, the voyaging vessels, the ability to navigate thousands of miles using the stars, and the currents and the clouds and the animals, all of these elements, the Spanish burnt canoes, and they prohibited people from passing on the knowledge.
I'm listening. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm listening to you, Professor, and I'm seeing so much of our Taino Aborigines culture within what you're saying, because we also kept the remains of our ancestors in a basket above the huts. And when it was said that our Aborigines people and Taino people were also matriarcal, o sea, the women had a very significant role. We had Taino chiefs, women Taino chiefs in our Caribbean and in Puerto Rico. So there's a lot of similarities, although we're like maybe 10,000 miles away from each other in different bodies of Pacific and the Atlantic or Caribbean. It's so impressive that there's so many other similarities between us, more than what's happening more in the modern time. Impressive.
Oh yes, I mean, I think indigenous peoples, they weren't all the same, but there were certain ways that they looked at life, and a lot of the really oppressive structures that come in modern life, a lot of indigenous societies didn't have them. And so, oh man, even I know there's so many similarities.
Yeah, that definitely in the thing about, you know, the Caribbean is connected when it comes to all its people, when it comes to traveling from one island to the other, and there was a certain governance going on within all of this Caribbean. So that's impressive to also see that there was a structure way before the Europeans came to any of our to colonize any of our islands. That's very nice, and more than 10,000 years of history, you know, beyond that.
Oh, definitely. Oh, yes. And so some of our culture did persist. Some of it, of course, was adapted. One of the things that, of course, is very important to me is the language, because, you know, when you were speaking Spanish earlier, you know, I could recognize many words because over several hundred years of colonization, you know, Chamorros adopted many Spanish words, especially words that you would use for governance, for religion, for education. These were all things that the Spanish sort of brought in their own systems, and then sort of you know, their own vocabulary for people to use it. But at the same time, there's plenty of Chamorro, and much of the grammar of the Chamorro language predates the Spanish, is much older than sort of Spanish. So that's why sometimes people say, when they hear Chamorro, they say, oh, that sounds just like Spanish. And it can, but there's also ways that you can speak in which you don't use any Spanish, but in which you just use sort of the older words, what they call Austronesian words, the words that are, you know, that the people across Asia Pacific in this part of the world, their shared language family. But so for me, the language is important because it is one of those things that gives us a clear picture back into the past, prior to colonization, and also who we are connected to in terms of the cultures and the islands around us. And so is there, and I wanted to ask you, is there a sense of what the Taino language might have been like prior to the Spanish colonizing?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, even within our language, as you said, we use a lot of words that are Taino, a root of Taino. For example, barbacoa, barbecue. We use a lot of canoa, things like that. Those are part of our Taino heritage. We also have a lot of African, because of all the Africans that were brought to the Caribbean. There's a mix of Taino, African, and all the other cultures that have been passing through these islands. Yeah. So and even in our religion, that's why I mentioned to you the aspects of how that's still very much alive. How we see our elders and our the history of our people. You know, how we connect to them spiritually. All of that is still very much alive, and a lot of even if it's cloaked, it's a little bit cloaked because it kind of took a different turn. A lot of the stuff that we practice as Aborigines or as African descent, a lot of that stuff was very not well seen by the Europeans or by the Americans. Our first when we were invaded in 1898, our first religion was a mix of, it's called Santeria, and it was a mix of all this stuff, but it was mostly African and indigenous of origin. And when the Americans came in, the Americans imposed their religion, their Protestantes, no? And then they came in and they imposed their religion. And what people did was blend it again. They did another blending. They just blend what they were practicing to what was imposed. And a lot of it still alive. It's just called what the colonizer defines it, you know? So it doesn't exclude you from participating in, you know, you are Protestant or you are Catholic, but you in your home you practice things a little different from what the church imposes on you or defines. So a lot of this stuff has been also part of survival. We want to be able to connect to our roots and to our history but we know that if we do it in the open, that can get us in trouble. And I think instinctively people have found ways to do what they want to do within open, hide in plain sight, as they would say, no? Yeah, that's why I think it's so important that this conversation and hopefully a lot more of these conversations, because there's a lot of things that we share that only makes us stronger, because there's that connection between our spiritual movements, which is very much still alive, which is something that transcends the physical dimensions of our archipelagos, you know. And I feel that that's one of the strategies that has worked for all colonizers, because you separate these struggles or sufferings or movements or identities, even cultures or history, and it's a lot easier to manipulate when you're thinking that you're just a small island in the Caribbean. And when you're thinking yourself, when you see yourself as a movement worldwide, or as a human connected to every other human worldwide, then it's a lot more difficult to convince me that I'm just a small little island in the Caribbean.
Oh yes, and no, thank you for that. Because one thing that's I always tell people is, you know, because in Guam, you know, Guam is about 212 square miles, about 150,000, 160,000 people on it, and people here say, oh, you know, Guam is too small. We could never be independent. We could never take care of ourselves. We need the United States. And then I'm like, you know, and then I know from Puerto Rico, I know that there's people who say the same thing there, even though Puerto Rico is millions of people. It's much larger. And it's just so interesting because, you know, other different parts of the world, but we are both have been conditioned to see ourselves as not having anything, as needing somebody else to take care of us.
Yes.
You know, and so that's why I think what you're saying about, you know, seeing past the segmentation, seeing past sort of the conditioning that tells us we're small, we're divided, we're far apart from each other. It's so important to find, you know, inspiration, strength, and solidarity in each other, because, you know, when I look at just a map of the Caribbean, you know, I think Puerto Rico would have so much economic possibilities in terms of sort of connecting to the independent states, Latin America and America, for example. You know, when people say to me, oh, Puerto Rico could never survive, I'm like, how could you say that? Look at where it's at. Look at what it has. There's so much possibility.
And it's absolutely erasing everything that happened before colonialism. I mean, we were here 10,000 years before all this stuff was imposed on us. We were already we already had our religion. We already had our language. We already had our math. We already had all the same thing that they talk about in Mexico or any other Aborigines a movement or nation or history. They're not enough for participating in this world movement, modern world movement, when it's totally the opposite. We've been proven, we've been here, we have survived, and we have prevailed before any of these cultures. As a matter of fact, a lot of them, when we're talking about even today, you know. So that's that argument. We hear a lot on the island, the argument that we're small and we can't participate because we don't produce anything, which is total lie. I mean, we produce what we have as citizens, as humans, as a creativity, as and in our culture we have the agriculture, we have the sciences, we've been participating in all this stuff. I think that there's a lot more awakening post in the last maybe 10, 20 years. I want to say something. There's also the colonizer feeds off people not believing in themselves. That's part of colonialism, not believing in who you are. And then if you convince people that they are not capable, it's a lot like it's a lot like domestic violence when you're talking about men or women who are in domestic violent relationships, where you have to convince or that the relationship functions because you create that insecurity or that not believing in that person themselves, and that definitely as a whole is called colonialism, and we've seen that in the North African colonies, and we've seen that all worldwide. So that's absolutely strategies that have worked for them. And now this awakening.
Yes. Oh yes, you're so right, and I think and that's what I always tell people, because for me, one of the main things that I do is I teach the Chamoru language. It's this thing that connects us, back thousands of years.
Yes.
It's something that's persisted in spite of colonization, right? And when the United States came in, one of the things they did is they tried to prohibit and ban the Chamoru language, punishing children for speaking it in schools. And so, for me, a lot of people nowadays say, because, only about 20%, and it's actually probably less at this point, of the Chamoru people in the world can speak our language. Okay. It's probably actually less than 20%. That was the number about 10 years ago. And so, people say to me all the time, they say, oh, but our language isn't, our culture, these things aren't important. You can't make any money off of Chamoru. Why would you speak Chamoru? Why would you speak our language? Why should I teach my kids it? Who, what does it matter? And it goes back to that issue of somebody telling you that your land is worthless.
Yeah.
Somebody telling you that you're worthless so that they can take things from you. Yeah. And you don't see its value until it's gone. And I always tell people, you shouldn't teach your children their native language because they can get employment or because they can make money off of it. If they can, great. But you teach it to them because it's theirs. It's yours. This is a test of a people. Are you just going to give up things because somebody told you they're worthless? Is that all it takes? Is somebody to come along and basically lie to you to your face and tell you, you know what, you suck, you're ugly, you're worthless? And are you just going to believe them?
Right.
Are you going to believe them because they spoke English? Are you going to believe them because they had fancy degrees, or because they look nice, or because they come from a big corporation? Are you just going to believe them? But I know that for us, and I imagine for Puerto Ricans, we have generations of people, unfortunately, just believing those sorts of things.
Right.
And then being willing to give up what's yours.
Yeah, and also have been killed, tortured, persecuted. I mean, that's all part of colonialism. All of the ones who don't obey, we will decide, or we will lynch. As a matter of fact, lynching is a very connected word to anything that has to do with trying to break people's spirits. And lynching was created in the Caribbean to break Tainos, or to break the black descendants, or to break, I mean, that's part of it. That when you mentioned earlier about the people and the connecting themselves to the language, those of us who speak more than one language know instinctively that what I say in Spanish not necessarily can be translated to English, because there's an emotional dimension aspect, a spiritual dimension to our language that connects us from on a different level. And for example, when I'm a poet, so when I do my poetry in Spanish, there's a different flow, there's a different feeling, there's a different manifestation, and I can do the same in English because I was born and raised in New York City. So it's kind of like a different persona. It's a different, it's within me, a different dimension of what I do as a communicator. I totally believe that learning languages can give you that. You can connect more, even if when you speak 3, 4, 5 different languages. Every time you connect to someone in their language, there's a more of a love and closer. It's a closer thing. That was why I got to start off with saying Hafa Adai, because I want that to be that part of we're parting from that dimension of respect, because I want to veneer you and your people as a culture, as an identity. It isn't just a hello. It's more than a hello. It's I appreciate and I understand and I feel you as a culture, as a being, as a human, as a Chamorro people. That my Taino within me salutes the Chamorro within you, and I think that's just connecting in that other dimension. I wanna bring it. I hope that we can have these other conversations, but I want to bring it to where we are today. How is Guam today when it comes to all the stuff that is going on? I know that because of COVID, you closed. A lot of the tourism was shut down. I saw some videos. I saw you yesterday. I didn't know I was going to be speaking with you, but I saw you on an interview last night because I was doing my homework to have this conversation with you, right? And I saw a video of you. I was like, I hope it's the professor I'm going to be talking to. Yeah, and it is, Michael. Good. I'm glad. So I saw that they closed because of the COVID. You guys are having huge problems economically when it comes to tourism, which is one of your main resources, I guess, right? How is Guam?
And so, Guam is in, it's in an interesting place, because on the one hand, as a territory of the United States, as a colony, we received federal pandemic funding. And so, of course,
right,
that definitely helps. But on the other hand, what we did see, though, is we saw independent Pacific countries around us, some of our neighbors in Micronesia, who received funding from the United States to support themselves, but also had the sovereignty that if they wanted to close their borders to protect themselves,
right,
they could. And so it was for many people on island, they felt that the pandemic was a reminder about how we shouldn't seek independence, or we can't take care of ourselves because of all this money is coming in. But I always reminded people and said, you know what, if we are a territory of the United States, then they have an obligation to provide for us.
Absolutely.
Because they limit our ability to work with others.
They control the borders, they control the waters, they control everything. So what is it that you don't have to? You have a responsibility within it. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Because people said, if you want independence or decolonization, then you shouldn't take American money. And we had a former governor here on island who, whenever he would go to Washington, D.C., people would say, there goes the governor, he's going to go beg for money. And the governor would always say, I don't go to Washington, D.C. to beg. I go to D.C. to collect what we are owed.
Yeah. I'm gonna add something to that, Doctor. I'm gonna add something to that.
Sure.
The military bases that occupied, at one time there were 26 military bases in Puerto Rico. These military bases in many or in the majority of the places around the world, that there's like thousands of them around the world. The ones that we know about and the ones that are cloaked that no one knows about, that are hidden someplace, have to pay rent. And that rent, in Puerto Rico's case, in Guam's case, 120 somewhat years of occupation, you owe me more than you will ever give me with any of your welfares or your stimulus checks or whatever. You owe me a lot more than anything you could ever. And then I don't even want to add to that the dimensions of all the damage that you have done to my culture, to my people, to my psyche, to my emotions, to the whole whatever's connected when it comes to mental health, when it comes to mental health and colonialism. I mean, there's so much damage. There's a movement. There's a huge movement. In the U.S. Asking the government, or requesting or demanding from the government, post-slavery, that there are things to be paid, that there needs to be solved, because 500 years of slavery, or in our case 125 years of slavery, and that has consequences. And we know, for example, what happened in Israel when the Second World War, and they requested the damages that were caused to their people, rightfully so. And those are millions and millions of dollars that were paid in bulk sums. So that whole argument that, no, why do we have to ask? We ain't asking for nothing. We're not asking for anything. We're demanding our right as a human being to exist. I want to give you some. I want to tell you something. Right now, they're listening to us. Anilu Ramirez from Mexico. She's a wonderful friend, and they're also listening to us. Professor Octavio Castillo from Panama. So we're most likely these two countries that I just mentioned, Mexico and Panama, have also had consequences from colonialism and occupation and military imposition. All these things have been manifested in us all. So, Doctor, yeah, I wanna know that the people have been moving towards independence or sovereignty.
Yes.
I saw that in the interview that you were talking about. You guys have these projects where you go to the different communities to educate. Talk to me something about that, por favor.
Oh yes. And to those who are listening from around the world, thank you, gracias, for your solidarity and for your support. The more that we learn from each other, the more we can understand the ways that we are connected, in good ways and bad ways.
Yes.
The more we understand the systems that hold us back, hold us down, the ones that can make us stronger. And so, I am the co-chair for the group Independent Guåhan, and we've been around for about 6 years now. We build off of the work of previous generations of activists who have pushed for the rights of the Chamorro people, that there be land for the landless, because thousands of Chamorro families were made landless in creating U.S. military bases after World War II. And many of those families still don't have land up until today, but work has been done in the past. And so our focus is, and on Guam, in the government, there is a commission on decolonization, which is supposed to educate, and also work towards a plebiscite, a vote, in which sort of people get to decide what is the best next option. And so there's an independence task force, and I'm a member of that. Then there's a free association task force, and then there's a statehood task force. And so for Independent Guåhan, our work really is, we're all volunteers in this, but we find whatever we can do. So we do murals in villages, and as part of those murals, then we hold teach-ins in the community. We hold storytelling sessions. We have monthly meetings for the community in which we present on a figure from our past who has stood up for the community. We invite their families to come so that we can honor them for what their ancestor has done. And then we also have during the pandemic, a lot of our community work stopped because of COVID and social distancing, and so we've tried to keep things going online. And so there's a podcast that I have every week called Finatsu, and so you can watch it on Facebook, listen to it on Spotify, iTunes, all sorts of stuff like that.
Can you spell it?
F-A-N-A-C-H-U, Finatsu. So in Chamorro, that means like rise, stand tall, Finatsu.
Okay. For the people who are listening.
And so, yes, no problem. And so, so our goal really is to push back against the misconceptions that the community has about independence. People say we're too small to be independent. And I say, you know what, actually, it's easier to be a small country that's independent, because you don't have to, if you're a small country, you don't have to build a huge railway system. If you're a small country, it's easier to pursue environmentally sustainable means to support yourself, as opposed to relying on all these big, messy, environmentally damaging or destructive means. Mm-hmm. If you are smaller, it's actually easier to sustain yourself than if you have a huge, massive country in which there's going to be a massive gap between rich and poor, in which you're going to have huge resource extraction. people fighting over how to get to the valuable things in your land. If you are smaller, it's manageable, it's easier. I always tell people, look at Singapore. Singapore is about the same
I wrote it down,
physical
as a matter of fact.
size.
Yeah.
It's about the same physical size as Guam. It has lots more people than Guam does, but I always say, look at them. Now, every country has good and bad things from a different perspective, right?
Sure.
Different perspectives, you say, they did this, they did that, this isn't good, this isn't bad. But the thing is, if you are independent, you get to make your choices.
Yes.
You get to make your successes, you get to make your failures too. But there's no more of this feeling that, it's a good thing America is here to take care of us,
right,
or to save us. No. Look around the world. It doesn't make sense today to be a colony. The world isn't filled with colonies.
Yes.
Almost 100 different colonies have fought for their independence. They've negotiated for it. They've bled for it. Those of us who remain as territories, we don't fit into the world today. We need to join the world.
Exactly. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And the world nowadays is more interconnected because of all technology. That's why we're having a conversation and we're like 10,000 miles away from each other and we're on real time. People are seeing us live, and this is how the world is today. The visions and the ideas of colonialism and having territories, that's so way back. That's so 200 years ago when things and people were being imposed upon. We're in a new millennium. Just to think about the idea of thinking about war, that's a question that I got to ask you, because you're very close to what's, to all this conflict that's developing right now with the Taiwan and the China and all that stuff. That's a question that I got to ask you, but I'm saying that's just old school. I don't understand. I see the young people, they're like, what is going on? What is wrong with these people? I mean, we're a new millennium and you're talking about throwing bombs at people? Come on, that's old stuff. Nowadays, everything's technology. Now they're hacking each other every day via the World Wide Web. They're having their own wars and economic wars, using dollar as a weapon and using COVID vaccines as weapons also, that kind of thing. So it's all about how things have moved in a different direction. They pretend that we don't see that. Singapore is a great example because of the time that it took for them to go from this small island to where they are now, where they are one of the most important ports in the world, and their technology, and they're talking crypto, and they're talking blockchain and all this stuff that's changing their whole economic and vision to the future. So I also like to talk, when I mention this, I also like to talk about Israel, because Israel is one of those other countries that is small but has had the focus on developing their technology and their know-how and their agriculture and all that stuff in deserts, So there's a lot of Chipre, Barbados, El Vaticano. I mean, what's with that? I mean, that's the smallest territory country or and they're the richest or one of the richest in the world, Vatican, that kind of thing. So don't I hate people that pretend that argument like people don't read anymore. That doesn't even make sense to talk about territories or colonialism nowadays. It's a different world. Doctor,
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing up those examples. And, this is something, because Guam is small, 212 square miles. 29% of Guam is U.S. military bases. We are very important to the United States military strategically.
Absolutely.
The United States is actively building more bases. They've destroyed sacred sites in order to build the new bases that they want, because they've been trying to transfer Marines from Okinawa to Guam. And so, people say, but we should support this because it's good for our economy. More people, more money, right? Other people say, no, we shouldn't because it's destroying the environment.
Yes.
For me, it all comes down to an issue of sovereignty, because we don't have a say over how much military the United States puts in Guam.
Right.
Because, they used to have a ship repair facility here, that the federal government sort of supported, and then they decided to close it. hundreds of people here lost their jobs. And could we say anything about it? People had those jobs, people relied on those jobs, they disappeared. Then they want to say, we're going to add, 1,000 new jobs for the military. What if we wanted to say no? What if we felt that this buildup was going to hurt our economy, hurt our environment, hurt the land, put us in more danger? We don't even have the ability to say no or reject it. And that's part of the problem. I always tell people, you brought up Israel. Israel has agreements, treaties with the United States.
Right.
Israel receives billions upon billions of dollars from the United States because it's strategically important.
And more than any other country.
Important.
More than any other country, yes. Doctor. More than any other country.
Oh, yes. And then, but the thing is, Chamorros from Guam that have served in the U.S. military, they've been stationed in Central Europe, places like, Kazakhstan, they've been in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they've seen billions of dollars pumped into countries where, they're not U.S. citizens. They're not a part of the United States. They're not even a territory of the United States. And they see the U.S. willing to give billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to all of these countries for diplomatic purposes, for bases in their countries. But they've got bases in Guam, 29% of the island. And, they give Guam food stamps.
Please,
They give Guam,
why not spit on my face?
Assistance.
Why not spit on my face, man? That's crazy.
And so that's that's why I always tell people, and this is something, it's always hard because so many people in Guam serve in the U.S. military.
Sure.
One of the highest rates of enlistment, just like so many of the other territories.
Yep.
I know Puerto Ricans have high enlistment rates.
Yes,
Virgin Islanders do. Samoans do. All of us, it's like a epidemic.
Because of
all
poverty.
Of us serve in the military in huge numbers. Oh, exactly.
Yeah. It isn't because we want to. It isn't because we want to kill people. It's because we're poverty. We're impoverished, and we need to work. We need to eat. So these people don't see any other options except the military bases. That's crazy.
Yeah. Oh yes. And but I always say, what's it called? What you want here on Guam, is that you want to have a proper relationship with the United States. So if you are an independent country or you're a freely associated nation, the U.S. military presence isn't just here because they want it. It has to be part of a treaty. It has to be part of an agreement.
Agreed.
And so it's not that sort of the U.S. gives you handouts here and there. They say, here's some student loans for you guys. Here's some pandemic funding. But it's part of an agreement in which you know what you're getting. You negotiate it, but that also means that the United States doesn't get to do whatever it wants.
Yeah.
It can't do any type of training it wants. It can't do whatever type of bombing it wants. It can't build up this area however it wants. So that's why I always say, if you love being connected to the United States, fine. But you should insist that you have a real relationship to the United States, not whatever we have now, where we're like the bastard stepchild,
not
or something
the prostitution.
Like that.
Yeah.
I think
exactly. I feel you perfectly. I feel exactly every single word that you're saying. It identifies. You're talking about us. Everything that you're saying, and I know that you're conscious of that. The idea of us not having to receive handouts. It's a matter of dignity. It's a matter of dignity. Today, in the new millennium, talking about colonialism, talking about people having to submit themselves, their rights, their identity, their language. We have to submit ourselves to receive chump change, to receive crumbs. What are you talking about? You're talking about giving me education loans or education FAFSA or these things. Education should be free anyway, because it's an investment in the future. It isn't about making millionaires. It's about creating great citizens. People well-rounded that can think, that can read, that can participate, that can be part of the democracy. You can't have a bunch of idiots running around making decisions worldwide. You need people who can create future and make the future's inventions. So absolutely, I totally, absolutely agree with you. I know we have so much to talk about and our time is limited, but I wanted to ask you: do you know that within the military base? Do they have bombing from boats to from ships to the island like it did in Vieques and Culebra? You know, in Vieques, a couple of years back, we had huge manifestations, the biggest manifestations historically that have been happening in Puerto Rico, because of they were renting out Vieques and Culebra for all nations to come and bombard our brothers and sisters in our smaller islands. How is that over there?
So in Guam, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that now. There are some attempts to do controlled detonations and stuff like that. They've tried in the past to do like underwater detonations, but because Guam is so heavily populated,
right,
there's northern islands that they do that in.
In the northern
islands. And in fact, one of the most beautiful islands in our archipelago is called Pagan Island. Beautiful. It's sort of got two volcanoes on it on different ends of it. One of the volcanoes is still active. Beautiful black sand beaches, volcanic hot springs, and so the U.S. military a few years ago said that they wanted that island to bomb it, to just destroy it, to practice. And, it got the people in the northern islands very upset. They protested it, petitioned against it, and so it looks like they've stopped it. But there's just something about the U.S. military. They love these beautiful places. They just love to bomb them.
Yeah. I think it's in their nature.
To destroy them.
It's in the nature of assassination and killing. It's just another extension of all that, because militaries. I mean, they don't train militaries to go do community service. They train military people to go kill other people. So killing nature or killing animals or killing people, it's all in the same line of disgust. It's the same thing. So it's totally normal to talk about militaries destroying environments, because that's all the wars have left behind. Even today's wars are leaving behind all kinds of destruction. I mean, everything from the nuclear bombardment that they did in Japan and the stuff that we are seeing now. It's just destroying the future of how's the cancer in Guam when it comes to people and cancer? Is it high considering or compared to other countries?
It's very high.
And is it connected to the military?
There's strong evidence that it's connected to the military.
Yeah.
It's because the highest cancer rates tend to be in areas that are right outside the military bases.
Yes.
And for some types of cancers on Guam, it's like dozens of times the average of the United States. So like you are dozens of times more likely to get those types of cancers in Guam than elsewhere. And this is the hidden sort of toxic cost of militarization. A lot of people don't realize it. They think about the flashy recruiting posters, that tell you signing bonuses. They think on Guam, people get enamored. They get tricked in a way because on the base everything is so clean. The lawns are nicely cut, the houses are nicely painted. They think on base there's your cousin who's got 3 broken cars in front of his house who swears he's going to fix them. There's nothing like that, but all of that hides the true cost, which is contamination. And the contamination and the impact of it is something that has radicalized so many Chamoros. One of our sort of leaders in our movement who passed away, his name was Angel Santos, and he was in the U.S. Air Force, and he served really well. He was honored by the United States Air Force for his service, and then he had an experience. First of all, he was part of one of those families that lost their land when the military built their bases after World War II on the island. But when he was stationed here on the Air Force Base on Guam, one of his youngest child, who was only about 2 years old, died of a very sort of rare catastrophic disease. and sort of, they took her to Hawaii to try to save her, but she passed away. And then later, while he was here on Guam, he went, sitting at his desk, some reports get passed by him, and he looks and they say confidential, do not share, not for the public. And it shows that the U.S. Air Force knew that the drinking water on their own base was contaminated.
Yeah.
And that eventually this man, Angel Santos, who eventually was elected into our legislature, he was a senator here on Guam, he did more research and he found that across the United States on bases, these chemicals in the water were connected to the types of diseases that had killed his daughter. And so he became one of the most outspoken critics of the U.S. military and its impact in Guam because of that experience. And the thing is, it's always there. It's always right around us, and so many people just don't want to acknowledge it because it means then sort of that the whole facade of the military is a lie. But that's the truth of it. I hate to say it, that's the truth of it, is that militaries are not necessarily life-giving. They contaminate. They take, they destroy.
I want to tell you something that I think that comes from my heart. What you're doing is important. What you're doing, Professor, is future. It's for our next generations to come. That struggle for identity, even though you may hear all these other noise when it comes to all that Chinese stuff, when it comes to all that how to buy people out, and then statehood or let's stay connected to these people. These people are doing well for us. No, that's that noise. But the reality is, within their hearts, they know this is imposition. They know this is criminalization. They know this is slavery. They know that within. They can say one thing, but their hearts are telling them, listen, you got no land. You're living. You're invited in your own home. I mean, you're an invite in your own home. That's not. So what you're doing, it's very, very, very important, and people will remember these struggles that you mentioned. Every single one of them, without exception, we have on this island, and I'm stepping in the foundations of people like Don Pedro Albizu Campos, are one of our great leaders, and Hostos and Betances and all these people that have walked and have inspired liberation and have inspired my Puerto Ricanidad and my struggle. And I see the same arguments that they had 100 and whatever years ago, or even 300 years ago. They're still having the arguments, some of these people today, but the same people that sell out. They're the same people that sell out, that are willing to give their health for cents, or for, like I said before, crumbs. So what you're doing is very important. I want to thank you. I know that this is not going to be our last conversation. I wanted to talk about repatriations, if it's being discussed as a closing concept. The concept of you paying us back for 125 years of occupation. Is that being discussed?
It's unfortunately not being discussed. It's unfortunately not being discussed just because a lot of attention on reparations got focused around World War II. So during World War II, Guam was occupied by the Japanese. 30, more than 1,000 people died. 1 in every 22 people died in the occupation. And so after that, the United States signed a treaty with Japan, and they accepted legal obligation, responsibility. So if anyone wanted reparations from Japan, then the United States had to pay for it. And so Chamoru's pushed and fought for decades, and the United States finally gave reparations, but they gave it in a really messed up way. They gave it to us where we had to pay for it ourselves.
That just blows my mind. I'm listening to this and I'm going, that's not what the concept. They just played with us, because that's just reparations. That's not the definitions. So it can't be I pay for my own reparations.
Exactly, and that's why, the U.S. just wanted to close the chapter on it, and they said, look, here, this money that we collect from Guam every year, we will use that to pay you, which means that the people here with their taxes paid for their own reparations.
Wow.
It's messed up, and so I just say that, though, because, the United States, despite all of its bluster about being about liberty, democracy, freedom, and everything, justice,
blah blah blah.
Really, as we know who live in the colonies of it, we know that's not true.
Absolutely.
We live the hypocrisy every day.
Yeah, and that's why we need to keep talking about it, so the rest of the world understands what we're going through, what we have been going through. This is not anything that we need to keep quiet on. We need to keep screaming it out in the world, and it happens. So we gotta keep talking about it. I'm gonna say something real quick in Spanish. Para los que nos están escuchando, estoy hablando con el doctor Michael Guåhan Bebacua, que es un profesor de la Universidad de Guam, y hemos estado hablando sobre las similitudes en nuestros países que están ocupados por Estados Unidos de Norteamérica, ocupados como territorios o colonias, y que nosotros, y las consecuencias de estar viviendo en un mundo, en un país, en un nuevo milenio, con nuevas alternativas y caminando hacia esta soberanía, ¿no? Esta identidad de que somos quienes somos y merecemos vivir en libertad. Y de eso se trata esta conversación que hemos estado teniendo. Professor, I hope that we could schedule another one, or maybe in a month or so, another conversation where we can continue this, because there's so much I want to ask you.
Absolutely, I would love to.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for participating. Any information that you want to give to the people who are listening or are going to be listening to this eventually?
No, just please, follow Independent Guåhan on social media, and then if anyone else is interested in sort of solidarity stories, connections, I'm happy to talk, and I'm happy to share stories from Guam and have the privilege of sharing stories from Puerto Rico.
Let me ask you something. This is like a parenthesis. Is there an organization that includes all of the territories, like groups, like a group where we can all have exchange information? Does that exist?
It's different things like that have existed in the past, but I don't know of anything that's active right now. So usually, it's just there's a Puerto Rican group that's having a conversation, and then they invite somebody from Guam, or American Samoa. But I don't know of any. But if I'm always down to try to start networks like that, though, because as our discussion shows today, they're so important.
Yeah, and the technology is in our fingertips. It's just a matter of coordinating, because we can do this as groups and be worldwide at the same time. If it's just a little bit of coordinating. Thank you, Professor.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for participating and having this conversation with me, and sharing
so
your
much.
love with us on the island here in Puerto Rico.
All right, thank you very much. Until next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.